That great rock and roll lore. I swear you only get these kinds of stories in like rock and roll and baseball. You can't make this stuff up. So a foreign language song that was originally released as a B-side all of a sudden became a massive worldwide #1 smash that everybody was singing even though they couldn't speak the language. Nearly 30 years after it was released. I mean, how does that happen? Well, it helps when one of the great rock and roll stories comes back into the zeitgeist. The singer of this song was a mere 16 years old when he recorded it. And he came at a time of teen idols who had other people writing their songs, but he was one of those guys who wrote his own stuff. And he had a world of possibilities ahead of him, until he was killed in a tragic accident. Since then, we've all wondered what might have been. Now, what ifs are always hard, but this one is even worse because his fate was determined by a coin flip. Join us for a great tribute to an original guitar hero coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever sang the chorus of Don McLean's American Pie at the top of your lungs, this is your channel. Make sure that you subscribe below right now. Click the bell so that you're always in the know on our latest and greatest interviews and our stories. Also, check out more insider videos and become a curator of this history by joining our Patreon. We'd love to have you. So it's time for another edition of #1 in Our Hearts. So this is a show that honors songs that were so unbelievably great. They absolutely should have been #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But for whatever reason, be it radio play, label support, lack of marketing, or just sheer stupidity, the songs came up a little bit short. Today, we're taking you back a little bit farther, and we're going to tell the story of Ritchie Valens and La Bamba. This one has a twist, this #1 in Our Hearts, because it actually got a second shot on the charts almost 30 years later. It's a really cool story. Let's get into it. For a moment, let's go back to February 3rd, 1959. Turning on the news that day, you might have heard something like this.
3 young singers who soared to the heights of show business on the current rock and roll craze were killed today in the crash of a light plane in an Iowa snow flurry.
The pilot, Roger Peterson of Clear Lake, Iowa, was also killed. 3 beloved musicians lost in the blink of an eye. Richie Valens, born Richard Stephen Valenzuela in 1941, was the first major Hispanic American rock star in U.S. music history. Growing up in Pacoima, California, Richie's parents separated when he's still a boy. Valens lived with his father until his father passed away in 1951. From then on, he lived with his mother, his brothers and sisters. It was while attending school that Valens was first introduced to rock and roll. Richie was a completely self-taught musician and rapidly absorbed the sounds of Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and his favorite, Little Richard.
Oh, Johnny, go, go. Johnny, be good. Nobody knows about. Put down to the jailhouse rock.
As Richie developed his energetic guitar sound with a style uniquely his own, and also made a name for himself playing guitar at school activities, and pretty much anywhere else he could find in the crowd, he entered his sophomore year at San Fernando High School in the fall of 1957. And he joined the band called the Silhouettes, led by Gil Rocha. The group played dances and other venues throughout the San Fernando Valley up until May of 1958. Richie then connected with Bob Keane. He was the owner of an independent LA record label called Delphi Records. Keane was really impressed with Ritchie Valens, and he invited him to do some recordings at his home studio. Over the course of several weeks, the two met regularly for songwriting sessions. And in May of 1958, Ritchie signed a contract with Delphi. Now, around this time, Keane also convinced Ritchie Valens to shorten his last name from Valenzuela to Valens, and he added a T to his first name. Keane knew that some DJs wouldn't play Ritchie's records if they realized that he was Latino. So sad. Keane also put together a backup band for Ritchie Valens, and together they recorded his first single, Come On, Let's Go. The song reached number 42 in the U.S. Now, following its release, Ritchie Valens went on an 11-city U.S. tour. By the time the next school year was ready to start, Richie's music career was taking off at high speeds, so that Richie then left Pacoima High in the fall of '58. The following October, Valens released another single, Donna. Donna was written by Valens about his girlfriend back home in Pacoima, Donna Fox. The two were from different neighborhoods, and they had to see each other somewhat in secret, as Donna's father prohibited the two from seeing each other. Richie pitched the song idea to Keane, who, along with publishing partner Herb Montai, helped Richie finish that song. In terms of chart positions, Donna was Richie's biggest hit. It went all the way to number 2 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. However, in the long run, Donna wouldn't be Richie's biggest song. That distinction would actually go to Donna's B-side, La Bamba. Pardon the interruption, but I gotta quickly tell you about our new nationally syndicated radio show, Classic Rock You with the Professor. This launching in a bunch of major markets this weekend. Really excited about it. Finally, I get to play the full songs with bite-sized stories of these classics told by the legends alongside the tracks. I know you're going to dig it. Check it out early Saturday morning starting at 6 a.m. Central or Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Central. Just click on the link right up here or the link below in the description to listen on WDRV The Drive in Chicago. Classic Rock You, I'm telling you, it's a can't miss. La Bamba is, in fact, one of the first and best-known Latin rock songs, although it didn't start that way. La Bamba is actually a traditional Mexican folk song called huapango. Commonly played at weddings in the eastern region of Veracruz, a huapango is basically fiesta music comprised of nonsense verses. Although Richie was not a native Spanish speaker, he knew about the song through his family members. Apparently, Richie was playing around with the song during a car ride with Bob Keane, who immediately tried to convince Richie to record it. Now, Valens was reluctant to do it, though. He was proud of his Mexican heritage and was hesitant to merge the traditional song with that of rock and roll. Plus, he thought the song's Spanish lyrics would be lost on American audiences. Remember, this is back in the late 50s. But Bob persisted, and ultimately Richie agreed to do it. So he turned to his Aunt Ernestine, for help with the Spanish lyrics. La Bamba would be the only Spanish song in Richie's repertoire, but the 1958 adaptation captivated American listeners. Yeah, maybe most listeners didn't understand the words, but that didn't matter. They absolutely loved the rhythm. And La Bamba, a B-side, became a top 40 hit in the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, which is very rare back then. La Bamba is pretty simple all the way around. It features a basic verse-chorus form, and lyrically there isn't much to it. Like I said, the words don't really mean anything in particular, and La Bamba is just the name of a dance, like a samba or a cha-cha. But for those of you who are curious, here's what the lyrics translate to in English. The song begins by saying, "To dance the bamba, you only need a little bit of grace." After that, the lyrics go something like, "For you and me, and up, for you I will be." And then Valens repeats the humorous lines, "I'm not a sailor, I'm a captain." Finally, the song kicks into the catchy chorus, which is simply "Bamba Bamba," repeating over and over again. In the U.S., La Bamba went to number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100. Internationally, it reached number 32 in France, and it went to number 13 in Belgium. Actually went to number 4 in the UK. In 2019, Valens' version of La Bamba was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the National Recording Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. It was also included in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's list of 500 songs that were influential in shaping rock and roll. Now, if you've been paying attention, you already know the two biggest Ritchie Valens pop culture references. Can't even call them references because it was all about Ritchie Valens. 1987, the film La Bamba, and the second being Los Lobos' cover of the movie's title song.
Legend of Richie Valens, a true story. La Bamba.
I mean, there's no way that I would miss these. Don't worry. I just wanted to touch on them together, so I saved them for last. The 1987 movie La Bamba starred Lou Diamond Phillips as Richie Valens. Perfect portrayal.
I love you, Donna. You know, I'm still gonna marry you one of these days.
With 3 hits on the charts.
It tells the Hollywood-flavored story of Richie's abbreviated rise to rock and roll stardom. From his days in Pacoima, making a meager living working on farms, to his friendship/rivalry with his brother Bob. It also covers a relationship with Donna, to, of course, the music. It's a memorable ride that rekindled Richie's legacy in 1987 and introduces music to a new generation of fans.
And ball tonight.
And a dream.
The film opened in wide release in the U.S. on July 24th, 1987. It was a box office smash. It grossed $52 million on an independent film budget of roughly $6 million. It's really amazing. Lou Diamond Phillips said that no one was expecting it to succeed. But when he first saw the movie, he thought, whoa, we might be onto something here. I mean, this could go through the roof. And it did.
Come on, baby, just rock.
Look at my Richie. He's shining like a star.
I remember seeing the trailer for La Bamba on MTV in the early summer of '87, and it lit a fire within me. I mean, come hell or high water, I had to see this movie. After begging my dad for weeks, he took me to it the week it came out. I was hooked. I went right out and bought the soundtrack, also several Richie Valens cassettes, greatest hits, and the live concert that he did at his junior high. I also sent away for a book on his life that was written at that time. I went down the rabbit hole of the tragic plane crash and Richie's short life, and he became one of my musical heroes. First of all, Richie was in a class of his own because even at only 16 and 17, he was writing his own music. He was, like I said, the first Mexican-American rock star. He paved the way for many who would follow. I read somewhere that you were very influenced by Ritchie Valens, which was really impressive to me because when I saw the film La Bamba as a child, it made me want to learn more about the history of rock and roll.
Yeah, well, Ritchie Valens, I think he just got out of high school, or he was still in high school when he went on the road with Buddy Holly, and they call him Little Richie because he loved Little Richard, So Jimi Hendrix, everybody, we all wanted to go to Little Richard. He was the gateway to rock and roll. Little Richard, Bob Dylan, they all claimed that they wanted to either sound or have charisma or make an impact. Because Little Richard, before the Beatles and before anybody, and it was 3 guys, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Bo Diddley. Then you can have the other stuff, which was Pat Boone and whatever, but that was polite, whatever. This is the real deal that is still, because of all of that, came Led Zeppelin, because Little Richie Valens would, come on, let's go. It's got the beginning of like, don, 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 which is Carlos Alhambra, because you can trace things to, the Shadows and Ritchie Valens, when the guitar started to sound a little bit more ordinary, mean, It wasn't, even this cat who's still alive is an incredible guitar player. He played with Ricky Nelson, played with Elvis Presley, Burton, what is his name?
James Burton.
Yeah, that's a hell of a guitar player. But he didn't play gnarly and funky like Lonnie Mack. It takes other guys to become a little bit more, I'll just say it, treacherous.
I saw the movie like 8 times in the theater, and I still watch it every couple of years. Whoever cast this movie was brilliant. Lou Diamond Phillips, perfect as Richie Valens. There's so many other great performances from Rosanna DeSoto as Richie's mother, and Issa Morales as his brother Bob, Joey Pants as Bob Keane, and then the casting of the rock heroes of the age. Brian Setzer as Eddie Cochran.
I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the summertime blues.
Marshall Crenshaw as Buddy Holly. He is Buddy Holly.
I just can't seem to get you off my mind.
And Howard Huntsberry as Jackie Wilson. Just perfect choices. I think it's one of the greatest rock and roll movies ever. And just like Ritchie Valens' song, in 2017, La Bamba the movie was deemed culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant, and it was added to the National Film Registry of the U.S. Library of Congress.
And I'd like to record it.
But perhaps even more popular than the film itself was the Los Lobos cover of La Bamba, which spread like wildfire in 1987. La Bamba became a massive global hit. It peaked at number 4 in Norway, it went to number 3 in Sweden and Austria, went to number 2 in the Netherlands, and it went to number 1 in the UK, in Spain, and Italy, and New Zealand, and Zimbabwe, and Switzerland, and France, and Canada, and Australia, everywhere. And in what may be the ultimate number 1 in our hearts, redemption, here in the US, La Bamba climbed to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It also reached number 4 on the AC charts, and it went to number 11 on the mainstream rock chart, a true triple threat. Originating from East LA, Los Lobos was called upon to cover Ritchie songs for the La Bamba soundtrack. Said band member Louis Perez, the request came directly from Ritchie's family. La Bamba was the single and the stack of 45s that everybody carried around when we were growing up. Absolutely, sure, let's pay tribute to him. End of quote. And even though it was a breakthrough moment for the band Los Lobos, who had formed clear back in 1973, multi-instrumentalist Steve Berlin said the band's expectations were really low for it. He said, "I remember seeing the film and thinking, that's actually a decent movie. Shame that no one's going to see it." It's funny how our expectations get turned on their head sometimes, you know. Los Lobos actually contributed 8 tracks to the La Bamba soundtrack. Brilliant covers of these songs. 3 of Valens' most famous songs, Come On, Let's Go, Donna, and La Bamba. This soundtrack was so great. I mean, after listening to it hundreds of times that summer, it actually led me to Los Lobos, How Will the Wolf Survive? And I became a lifelong Los Lobos fan. In fact, I need to interview those guys. Okay, so back to Ritchie Valens. Leading up to the day that the music died, Ritchie Valens was once again getting ready to head out on tour. Place at about the time he was attending a going-away party at his mother's house, and then he flew out to Chicago to join Buddy Holly, JP, Big Bopper Richardson, and there was a few others on the Winter Dance Party tour. So the circuit was scheduled to take them to 24 Midwestern cities in just as many days. There was no days off. And you got to remember that this was in the dead of winter. This was the 50s. This is North Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. At times, temperatures on the trip reached 30 below. The traveling musicians drove to each destination in converted school buses, some of which broke down along the way, and they had defective heaters. On one occasion, the performers were actually stranded on a remote highway in a northern Wisconsin forest. Waiting to get back on the road, I guess they huddled under some blankets and burned newspapers to try to stay warm. This was the original Hell Freezes Over tour, if you will. It was rough touring back then, it was. And as the performers endured such unbearable conditions, frozen, frostbitten, sleep-deprived, even unable to wash their clothes, Buddy Holly finally hit a breaking point. And the tour still had something like 400 miles of freezing bus routes to drive at that point. So after their February 2nd, 1959 gig at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, Holly chartered a small plane for him and his bandmates to fly to the next town. However, as he and Waylon Jennings and Tommy Allsup readied to board the plane, there were some last-minute seating rearrangements. The Big Bopper, who was exhausted and sick, he talked Waylon into letting him fly instead. Ritchie Valens, just as miserable, wanted to fly as well, even though he had a fear of flying that went back to the day he missed school to attend his grandfather's funeral when he was just a little kid. 2 planes collided over his school, with the wreckage falling on some of the boys who were playing in a field. And one of Ritchie's best friends was killed that day. Ritchie Valens never flew because of that. He believed that had he been at school that day instead of his grandfather's funeral, he would have died. So haunted him his whole life. So Richie flipped a coin with Tommy for that final seat. And though Valens won the toss, soon after he lost his life. In fact, after the spots were decided upon on the plane, Waylon Jennings and Buddy Holly were joking around about the change in seating arrangements. And Buddy Holly told Waylon, "I hope your damned bus freezes up again." To which Waylon replied, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." Gosh. So they're on their way to Fargo, North Dakota's Hector Airport. But due to some severe winter weather, the plane never arrived. It crashed roughly 5 miles north of Clear Lake, not long after takeoff. Valens, Holly, Richardson, and the pilot Roger Peterson all died in this accident. Richie's family and Bob King were, of course, devastated when they heard the news. Such a tragedy. Richie was only 17, like I said, and his bright career, it had only lasted 8 short months. But just because Richie was gone, that doesn't mean that he was forgotten. His debut album, Richie Valens, was released posthumously by Delphi. That was in March of 1959. Following that, other albums and singles were also issued. Richie and Richie Valens in concert at Pacoima Junior High. Those were released from sessions recorded for Delphi and at a performance for, his classmates. The singles That's My Little Susie and Little Girl, they also became minor chart hits.
Well, I got a gal named Sue.
Slow down, little girl.
I really believe that had Richie Valens lived, he would have had a surefire Hall of Fame career. I mean, he is in the Hall of Fame. But I'm just saying, he was only 17 and he had single-handedly written all of his hits, with the exception of Bamba, which was a traditional song. But let's be honest, he made it into the rock song that it became, that it is. And his rock instrumental, Fast for 8, that was a great guitar song that showed what might have been had Richie been able to grow and develop as an artist. The sky was the limit. Richie Valens was one of a kind, a true pioneer who helped blaze the trail of rock and roll. Leave us a comment about Richie Valens and La Bamba and the movie. What do you remember about the song? Did you see the movie? It blew my mind. I love the movie. And what do you think? How did Los Lobos, what about their cover? What did you think about that? Let us know in the comments below. Let's really honor Richie Valens. What else should I cover on here? I'd like to cover American Pie, verse by verse. I've interviewed Don McLean. Let me know if you'd like to see that. We got to keep the music alive. That's what this whole thing's about. Make sure to subscribe below and to keep rock and roll alive, keep the history in people's minds. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth.